I was standing in my driveway watching the propane delivery truck back up toward my house when I saw Patricia Montgomery marching across her lawn like she was about to declare war. It was a Tuesday morning in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, and I had finally scheduled the long overdue propane delivery for my backup generator and outdoor grill. The truck had just arrived, and the driver was positioning it carefully near my property line where the tank sat. Everything was going smoothly until Patricia appeared. "Stop right there," she shrieked, her voice hitting a pitch that probably disturbed dogs 3 blocks away. The delivery driver, a heavy-set man in his 50s named Joe according to his name tag, looked at me with confusion. I just shrugged. This was my first real encounter with Patricia since moving into Sunset Hills community 6 months ago, though I had heard plenty of stories from my neighbor Greg about her reign of terror as the HOA president. Patricia was in her late 40s, with severely highlighted blonde hair cut in that signature, "Can I speak to the manager" style. She wore white capri pants and a bright pink polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on it, which she wore like a badge of authority. Her face was already flushed red as she stormed up my driveway. "You cannot have that delivery here," she announced, pointing at the truck with a perfectly manicured finger. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice level. "This is my property and I am having my propane tank filled. This is completely normal. Not without HOA approval, it is not." Patricia pulled out her phone, waving it around. "This is a commercial vehicle on residential property, and you did not submit the proper forms in triplicate to have it approved by the board. This is a clear violation of Section 12, subsection 4 of our community guidelines." Joe looked at me again, clearly wanting to just do his job and leave. "Sir, is this going to be a problem? I have 4 more deliveries today." "No problem at all," I said firmly. "Please continue with the delivery." Patricia's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "If you do not stop this immediately, I will call the police." I had to suppress a laugh. "You're going to call the police over a propane delivery?" "Yes, I am." She was already dialing. "This is an emergency situation. You are creating a hazard in our community without proper authorization." I watched in disbelief as Patricia actually called 911. The conversation was surreal. She reported an unauthorized commercial vehicle creating a dangerous situation at my address on Cactus Flower Lane. The way she described it, you would think Joe was parking a tank full of explosives in the middle of a playground. Joe looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Look, man, I really do not need this kind of trouble. Maybe I should just come back another day." "No," I said. "You are doing nothing wrong." "Neither am I. She can call whoever she wants, but you are completing this delivery." The entire neighborhood was now watching. Greg from next door had come out onto his porch with a cup of coffee, shaking his head. A few other neighbors had emerged from their homes, drawn by Patricia's shouting. Mrs. Chen from across the street gave me a supportive wave. Within 10 minutes, a Phoenix police patrol car pulled up. 2 officers got out, looking like they had expected something far more dramatic than what they found. A young male officer named Rodriguez and his partner, an older female officer named Santos, approached with their hands nowhere near their weapons. "We got a 911 call about a hazardous situation," Rodriguez said, looking around at the completely normal scene of a propane truck making a delivery. Patricia rushed over to them before I could speak. "Officers, thank goodness you are here. This man," she pointed at me dramatically, "is having an unauthorized commercial vehicle on residential property without HOA approval. This is creating a dangerous situation for our entire community. That truck could explode." Officer Santos looked at the propane truck, then at Patricia, then at me. I could see her trying very hard not to roll her eyes. "Sir, what is going on here?" she asked me. "I am Nathan Ellis. I live here at 2847 Cactus Flower Lane. This is Joe from Desert Propane Services, and he is filling my residential propane tank, which is a routine service I have done every year." That is literally all that is happening. Rodriguez walked over to the truck and spoke with Joe, who showed him all his permits, licenses, and delivery authorization. The officer examined everything carefully. Patricia was not done, but he did not get HOA approval. Our rules clearly state that any commercial vehicle must be approved 48 hours in advance. This is a violation, and these officers need to make him stop. Santos turned to Patricia with a patient but firm expression. "Madam, 911 is for emergencies. This is not an emergency. This is a routine propane delivery, which is completely legal and poses no danger to anyone." "But the HOA rules, madam, HOA rules do not override the law. This gentleman has every right to receive propane delivery to his home. The truck is properly licensed and permitted. There is no violation of any law occurring here. You are not listening to me." Patricia's voice was rising again. "I am the HOA president, and I have the authority to— You have the authority to manage your homeowners association within the bounds of the law," Santos interrupted. "You do not have the authority to prevent legal commercial activity on private property. Calling 911 for a non-emergency is actually a misuse of emergency services." Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Rodriguez returned from the truck and confirmed everything was in order. The two officers advised Joe he could continue with his delivery, gave Patricia a warning about misusing 911, and left. The whole interaction had taken maybe 15 minutes. "This is not over," Patricia hissed at me as Joe finally began the propane transfer. "You will be hearing from the HOA board and you will be fined for this violation." "Looking forward to it," I said. She stormed off, and Joe completed the delivery without further incident. He apologized for the drama, and I assured him it was not his fault. Greg came over after the truck left. "Welcome to Sunset Hills, officially," he said with a grin. "Patricia runs this place like it is her personal kingdom. She has fined people for having the wrong shade of beige on their house numbers. Last year, she tried to make the Johnsons remove their garden gnome because it was not on the approved decorations list." "There's an approved decorations list." "Oh, there's an approved list for everything. She has been president for 3 years, and it has gotten worse every year. The board is basically just her and her 2 friends, Linda and Susan. They meet once a month to dream up new ways to make everyone miserable." I went inside feeling irritated but thinking that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. It was from the Sunset Hills Community HOA Board, informing me that I was being fined $500 for unauthorized commercial vehicle access without proper approval, and an additional $250 for creating a disturbance in the community. The letter cited various sections of the HOA guidelines and gave me 10 days to pay or face additional fines and possible legal action. I read through my copy of the HOA guidelines that night. They were 73 pages of single-spaced bureaucratic nonsense, but I found the section Patricia had referenced. It stated that commercial vehicles making deliveries or performing services must be approved by the board when such services will take longer than 30 minutes or create noise, obstruction, or potential hazard to the community. The propane delivery had taken Joe maybe 20 minutes total, and he had blocked nothing except my own driveway. There had been no noise beyond the normal operation of the truck, and the only hazard had been Patricia's blood pressure. I was not paying these fines. Instead, I decided to fight back. I spent the next few days doing research. I learned that HOAs in Arizona had to follow specific state laws about what they could and could not regulate. I also learned about the state fire marshal's office and their regulations regarding propane delivery and storage. Most importantly, I discovered that I could request an inspection of the HOA's enforcement actions if I believed they were not following state law. I filed a formal complaint with the Arizona State Fire Marshal's office, explaining the situation and requesting an inspection of both my propane tank setup and the HOA's attempt to prevent legal propane delivery. I also filed a response with the HOA board, formally contesting the fines and requesting a hearing. Patricia responded within 24 hours, denying my request for a hearing and stating that the fine stood. She included a snippy note at the bottom. Failure to comply with HOA regulations will result in additional penalties. The board's decision is final. Except it was not final because the fire marshal's office called me 3 days later. Inspector Thomas Garrett was assigned to my case, and he scheduled a visit for the following Monday. That Monday morning, I was waiting when Inspector Garrett arrived. He was a tall, lean man in his early 60s with gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. He wore the official fire marshal uniform and carried a tablet and inspection equipment. "Mr. Ellis, I am Inspector Garrett. I understand you have had some issues with your HOA regarding propane delivery." "That's correct," I said, and walked him through everything that had happened. I showed him the propane tank, explained Joe's delivery process, and provided copies of all the correspondence with Patricia and the HOA board. Garrett examined my propane tank setup carefully. He checked the clearances, the connections, the ventilation, and the placement. He took photos and notes. After about 30 minutes, he nodded approvingly. "Your setup is completely up to code, better than a lot of what I see, actually. You have got proper clearances, good ventilation, secure fencing around the tank. No issues here whatsoever." That is what I thought. The delivery was routine. "Routine and necessary," Garrett agreed. "Propane delivery is not something an HOA can prevent. It is an essential service, like having your electricity turned on or your water connected. State Fire Code actually requires that propane tanks be accessible for delivery trucks. If an HOA tried to prevent that access, they would be creating a code violation themselves. This was getting interesting. So Patricia was wrong to try to stop the delivery, completely wrong. Not only was she wrong, but if she successfully prevented you from getting propane delivery, she would be putting your property in violation of fire code by making your tank inaccessible. That is a serious issue. Garrett asked for Patricia's contact information and the HOA board details. He said he needed to conduct a follow-up inspection with them regarding their policies. I gave him everything he needed, feeling a sense of satisfaction building. 2 hours later, Garrett called me from his vehicle. "Mr. Ellis, I just finished meeting with Mrs. Montgomery and reviewing the HOA's guidelines. We have a significant problem here." "What kind of problem?" "The HOA guidelines include several provisions that directly conflict with state fire code. The section about commercial vehicles, for instance, would prevent or delay essential fire safety services. They also have rules about placement of fire safety equipment that do not meet code requirements. I am issuing a notice of violation to the HOA." I could barely contain my excitement. "A violation notice?" "Yes. They have 30 days to revise their guidelines to comply with state fire code, or they will face fines. I am also documenting the incident with the propane delivery. Mrs. Montgomery's actions in attempting to prevent a code-required essential service delivery could have resulted in a fire safety violation on your property. That is unacceptable. Did you explain this to her? Garrett's tone suggested he was trying not to laugh. I did. She was not happy. She insisted she had the authority to regulate all activities in the community. I had to explain to her, at length, that HOA rules cannot supersede state fire code. She threatened to call her lawyer. I told her that was her right, but the fire code is the fire code, and her lawyer would tell her the same thing. After hanging up with Garrett, I felt vindicated. But I was not done yet. I still had those bogus fines to deal with. That evening, I drafted a detailed letter to the HOA board. I outlined the fire marshal's findings, cited the specific Arizona state laws that protected my right to receive propane delivery, and demanded that the fines be rescinded immediately. I also demanded a written apology and requested copies of any revisions they made to the HOA guidelines to bring them into compliance with fire code. I sent copies to all 3 board members, Patricia Montgomery, Linda Harper, and Susan Whitmore. I also sent a copy to every homeowner in the community by posting it in the community Facebook group and the shared neighborhood newsletter board. The response was swift and explosive. Patricia called an emergency HOA board meeting for that Thursday evening. All homeowners were strongly encouraged to attend. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that was usually used for birthday parties and book clubs. I arrived 15 minutes early and found the place already packed. It seemed like everyone in Sunset Hills wanted to see this showdown. Greg saved me a seat near the front. The room buzzed with conversation, and I caught fragments of comments. About time someone stood up to her. Did you hear the fire marshal is investigating? My cousin had problems with Patricia over his garden hose being the wrong color. Patricia, Linda, and Susan sat at a table at the front of the room, looking like a tribunal. Patricia had a stack of papers in front of her and wore a dark blazer over her usual polo shirt, presumably to look more official. Linda was a thin woman in her 50s with nervous energy, constantly adjusting her glasses. Susan was rounder, with short curly red hair and a permanent frown. At 7 o'clock sharp, Patricia called the meeting to order by banging a gavel on the table. I had not realized they actually used gavels. This emergency meeting of the Sunset Hills Community HOA has been called to address serious concerns about community safety and rule compliance. Patricia began, her voice tight. It has come to our attention that certain residents believe they can ignore our rules and regulations with impunity. Several people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. A hand went up. Yes, Marcus, Patricia said, pointing to a black man in his 40s sitting near the back. Are we talking about Nathan's propane delivery? Because I read his letter and it sounds like he was following the law. The fire marshal agreed with him. Patricia's jaw clenched. The fire marshal's office has raised some technical concerns about the wording of certain guidelines. However, that does not change the fact that Mr. Ellis violated our community procedures by not submitting the proper forms before having a commercial vehicle on his property. I stood up. Those procedures are illegal if they prevent essential services like propane delivery. Inspector Garrett confirmed that. You do not have the floor, Mr. Ellis, Patricia snapped. Actually, since you just mentioned me by name, I think I do. You fined me $750 for following state law and maintaining fire code compliance. The fire marshal has confirmed that my propane tank setup is completely up to code and that delivery access cannot be restricted. Your rules, as written, violate state fire code. So I will ask you directly in front of all our neighbors. Are you going to rescind the fines? The room went silent. All eyes turned to Patricia. Her face was turning that familiar shade of red. The board will review the fire marshal's recommendations and make any necessary adjustments, she said stiffly. However, rules are rules and you violated the procedure. The fines stand. Then you are fining me for complying with state law, I said. That's not legal. Linda leaned over and whispered something to Patricia. Susan looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. The audience was murmuring now, conversations breaking out all over the room. Greg stood up. I have a question for the board. How many other rules in our guidelines conflict with state law? Because if Patricia is willing to fine someone for following the fire code, what else is in there that is illegal? Another hand shot up. It was Mrs. Chen. I was fined last year for having a political sign in my yard during election season. I paid it because I did not want trouble. But I looked it up after reading Nathan's letter, and Arizona law protects political signs on private property. Did you fine me illegally? The room erupted. Suddenly, everyone had a story about a fine they had received or a rule that seemed unreasonable. A man named David talked about being fined for parking his truck in his own driveway because it was classified as a commercial vehicle, even though he just used it for personal use. A woman named Jennifer described being fined because her mailbox was the wrong shade of beige, even though she had matched it to the original color specified when the houses were built. Patricia banged the gavel repeatedly. Order, order. This meeting is not about relitigating every fine ever issued. Maybe it should be, someone called out from the back. The meeting devolved into chaos. Patricia tried to regain control, but it was clear she had lost the room. After 30 minutes of arguments, accusations, and heated discussions, she abruptly declared the meeting adjourned and walked out with Linda and Susan trailing behind her. The community was buzzing after that. The Facebook group exploded with posts about HOA overreach and illegal fines. Several people mentioned they were going to request refunds for fines they believed were unjust. A few suggested it was time to elect a new HOA board, but Patricia was not done fighting. A week later, I received another letter. This time, she claimed I had violated community rules by inciting discord among residents and publicly disparaging the HOA board. The fine was $1,000. This was getting absurd, but it was also getting serious. Patricia was clearly retaliating against me for challenging her authority, and she was using the HOA's enforcement powers to do it. I called a lawyer. His name was Robert Chen, Mrs. Chen's nephew, who specialized in HOA disputes. He agreed to take my case. This is pretty blatant retaliation, Robert said after reviewing all the correspondence. You exercised your legal rights and she is punishing you for it. That is not allowed under Arizona HOA law. We can fight this. What do you recommend? First, we send a cease and desist letter to the board, demanding they rescind all fines against you and stop any retaliatory actions. We cite the fire marshal's findings and the relevant state laws. If they do not comply, we file a lawsuit. Will it come to that? Robert shrugged. Depends on how reasonable they want to be. In my experience, HOA boards that have gotten used to unchecked power do not back down easily. But when they lose in court, they lose big. And they are paying the legal fees with HOA funds, which means they are spending your neighbor's money to fight you. The cease and desist letter went out the next day. It was 5 pages of detailed legal argument, citing specific Arizona statutes about HOA powers and limitations, the fire marshal's inspection report, and case law about retaliatory fines. It gave the board 10 days to respond. Patricia responded in 3 days with a letter that can only be described as unhinged. She accused me of harassing the board, claimed I was trying to destroy the community, and suggested that I should move if I did not like the rules. She also increased the fine to $2,000 for continued insubordination and disruption. Continued insubordination, I said to Robert over the phone. This is not the military. She is not my commanding officer. Yeah, this letter is something else, Robert agreed. But it is also perfect evidence for our lawsuit. She is doubling down on retaliation. That is going to cost them. We filed the lawsuit in Maricopa County Superior Court the following week. The complaint outlined all of Patricia's actions, the illegal fines, the attempt to prevent essential services, and the retaliatory enforcement. We asked for all fines to be rescinded, an injunction preventing further retaliation, reimbursement of my legal fees, and an order requiring the HOA to revise its guidelines to comply with state law. The lawsuit got attention. A local news reporter named Jennifer Stone contacted me after seeing the filing. She worked for a Phoenix television station and had done several stories about HOA abuses in Arizona. She asked if I would be willing to be interviewed. I am doing a piece on HOA overreach, Jennifer explained. Your case is exactly the kind of thing we want to highlight. You have got the fire marshal on your side. You are being fined for following the law, and now the board is retaliating against you. It is a great story. I agreed to the interview. We filmed in my backyard, with my propane tank visible in the background. I explained everything that had happened, kept my tone reasonable and factual, and emphasized that I just wanted to follow the law and maintain my property safely. The story aired 2 days later during the evening news. It was a 3-minute segment that included my interview, shots of the propane tank, and a statement from Inspector Garrett confirming that my setup met fire code and that HOA rules could not prevent essential service deliveries. The reporter also interviewed Mrs. Chen, who talked about her political sign fine, and Greg, who discussed the general culture of over-enforcement in Sunset Hills. The station tried to get a comment from Patricia, but she refused to speak with them. The story ended with Jennifer Stone standing in front of the community clubhouse, saying, "The lawsuit is pending, and residents here say they are hoping for changes in how their HOA is run." For now, one homeowner's fight over a propane delivery has sparked a community-wide conversation about rules, rights, and who really has the power. The response was immediate. The story was shared hundreds of times on social media. Other homeowners from different communities across Phoenix started sharing their own HOA horror stories. A few legal advocacy groups reached out, offering support, and the local news attention put pressure on the HOA board. At the next regular HOA meeting, attendance was triple what it normally was. Patricia tried to conduct normal business, but she was interrupted constantly with questions about the lawsuit, the fire marshal's findings, and when the guidelines would be updated. Finally, a homeowner named Robert stood up and made a motion to hold a special election to recall the entire board. The motion needed signatures from 20% of homeowners to move forward. By the end of the meeting, he had 30%. Patricia was furious, but there was nothing she could do. According to the HOA's own bylaws, if enough homeowners signed the recall petition, an election had to be held within 60 days. The lawsuit moved forward while the recall campaign gained steam. Patricia hired a lawyer using HOA funds, which made many homeowners even angrier. The legal costs were coming out of the community's reserve fund, which was supposed to be for maintenance and emergencies. Our first court hearing was a preliminary motion where Robert argued for an immediate injunction to prevent the HOA from collecting the fines while the case was pending. The judge, a stern woman named Sandra Martinez, reviewed the filings and listened to both sides. The HOA's lawyer, a nervous young man named Brett, argued that the board had broad authority to enforce community rules and that my lawsuit was premature because I had not exhausted all internal appeals. "What internal appeals are available?" Judge Martinez asked. "The HOA bylaws allow for homeowners to appeal fines to the board," Brett said, "and Mr. Ellis did that," Robert interjected. "The board denied his appeal and increased the fine." Judge Martinez looked at Patricia's correspondence. "Mrs. Montgomery, are you present?" Patricia stood up from where she was sitting behind Brett. "Yes, Your Honor." "Did you increase Mr. Ellis's fine after he challenged it?" "He violated the rules, Your Honor, multiple times. He refused to pay the initial fines, and then he disrupted community meetings, and that is not what I asked." "Did you increase the fine after he challenged it?" Patricia hesitated. "Yes, because he continued to violate. That will be enough." "Mr. Brett, your client's actions appear to be retaliatory on their face. The fire marshal has confirmed that Mr. Ellis's propane setup is code compliant and that the delivery was essential. Your HOA rules, as currently written, conflict with state fire code. On what legal basis are you defending these fines?" Brett fumbled through his notes. "Your Honor, the HOA has the authority to regulate commercial vehicle access under Arizona revised statutes, not when those regulations conflict with fire safety requirements," Judge Martinez interrupted. "I am granting the preliminary injunction. The HOA is prohibited from collecting these fines or imposing new fines on Mr. Ellis pending the resolution of this case. Furthermore, I am ordering the HOA board to produce copies of all guidelines and a detailed accounting of how they were revised following the fire marshal's notice of violation. We will reconvene in 30 days. It was a solid win." As we left the courthouse, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Patricia stormed past without making eye contact, with Brett hurrying after her. "That went well," Robert said. "Judge Martinez clearly sees what is happening here. The HOA is going to have a hard time defending this." The recall election was scheduled for 3 weeks later. A slate of new candidates emerged, including Greg, Mrs. Chen, and a retired attorney named Frank Morrison. They ran on a platform of reforming the HOA, updating the guidelines to comply with state law, and ending the culture of excessive fines and enforcement. Patricia, Linda, and Susan tried to campaign to keep their positions, but the momentum was against them. The local news story had damaged their credibility, and the legal costs kept climbing. Brett's firm billed the HOA for $15,000 in the first month of the lawsuit, and homeowners were livid about it. On election day, the turnout was massive. Nearly 80% of homeowners voted, which was unheard of for HOA elections. The results were decisive. Greg, Mrs. Chen, and Frank won by large margins. Patricia, Linda, and Susan were out. The first meeting of the new board was held a week later. One of their first acts was to formally rescind all the fines against me and issue a written apology. They also retained Robert to help them revise the community guidelines to comply with state law, and established a new appeals process for any homeowner who felt they had been unfairly fined. Frank, the retired attorney, became the new president. At that first meeting, he made a short speech that got a standing ovation. "This community has been run by fear and intimidation for too long. HOA rules are meant to maintain property values and quality of life, not to punish people for living in their homes. We are going to get back to basics. Reasonable rules, fair enforcement, and respect for homeowners' rights. And we are going to follow the law because that is not optional. The lawsuit against the old board continued, though. Even though the new board had rescinded the fines, we were still seeking reimbursement of legal fees and damages for the retaliatory actions. Patricia, Linda, and Susan were being sued both as board members and individually for their actions. The discovery phase of the lawsuit was revealing. Robert subpoenaed all HOA records from the past 3 years, and what he found was shocking. Patricia had issued over 200 fines during her tenure as president, totaling more than $50,000. Many of them were for trivial violations or questionable interpretations of the rules. Several homeowners had been fined multiple times for the same issue, with the fines increasing each time. More troubling, Robert discovered that Patricia had been using the threat of fines to settle personal disputes. A homeowner who had complained about Patricia's own yard maintenance was suddenly fined for having grass that was a quarter-inch too tall. Another homeowner who had opposed Patricia in a previous election was fined repeatedly for various minor issues. "This is worse than I thought," Robert told me. Patricia was running the HOA like a personal fiefdom. She used fines as punishment against anyone who disagreed with her. The most damaging discovery was an email chain between Patricia, Linda, and Susan discussing my case. In one email, sent the day after the propane delivery, Patricia wrote, "We need to make an example of Ellis. He cannot be allowed to challenge us and get away with it. Fine him for everything we can think of until he either pays up or moves out." Linda had responded, "Are you sure that is wise?" "What if he fights it?" Patricia's reply, "Let him try. We have the HOA funds to hire lawyers and he will have to pay out of pocket. We can bleed him dry with legal fees if we have to." This email chain was smoking gun evidence of retaliation and abuse of power. Robert immediately filed a motion to amend our complaint to include claims for punitive damages and attorney fee sanctions. The HOA's insurance company, which was providing Patricia's legal defense, saw the emails and panicked. Insurance typically does not cover intentional wrongdoing, and these emails showed clear intent to misuse HOA power for personal retaliation. The insurance company sent their own lawyer to meet with Brett and review the case. 2 weeks later, Brett called Robert to discuss settlement. "My clients are willing to settle," Brett said. "What are Mr. Ellis's terms?" Robert and I had already discussed this. Full reimbursement of all legal fees, a payment of $25,000 in damages for the stress and harassment, a formal written apology from all 3 former board members, and an agreement that they will not seek any position on the HOA board for at least 5 years. There was a long pause. "I will discuss it with my clients." The negotiation took another week. Patricia initially refused to agree to any of it, insisting she had done nothing wrong. But her own lawyer explained that the emails made her defense impossible, and if the case went to trial, the damages could be much higher. The insurance company was already refusing to cover the punitive damages portion, which meant Patricia would be personally liable. In the end, they agreed to everything. The settlement was finalized in midsummer, about 5 months after the original propane delivery incident. I received a check for $25,000 plus full reimbursement of Robert's fees, which totaled $18,000. Patricia, Linda, and Susan each signed identical apology letters acknowledging that their actions had been inappropriate and that I had been in full compliance with the law. The fire marshal's office also completed its follow-up inspection of the HOA. The new board had worked with Inspector Garrett to revise the community guidelines, removing all provisions that conflicted with fire code. The revised guidelines explicitly stated that essential service deliveries, including propane, heating oil, septic pumping, and other safety-related services, could not be restricted or delayed by HOA approval processes. Garrett sent me a personal note after the inspection. "Mr. Ellis, thank you for bringing this matter to our attention. The issues we found in your HOA's guidelines were serious and likely existed in many other communities as well. Because of your case, we are now conducting a review of HOA regulations throughout Maricopa County to identify similar conflicts with fire code. You have helped make a lot of communities safer." That note meant more to me than the settlement check. The local news did a follow-up story when the settlement was announced. Jennifer Stone interviewed me again, this time focusing on the resolution and the changes in the community. "So Nathan, looking back on this whole experience, was it worth it?" she asked. "Absolutely," I said. Nobody should be punished for following the law and maintaining their property safely. HOAs serve an important purpose, but they have to operate within the law. When they do not, homeowners need to stand up and fight back. I am glad I did, and I am glad our community now has leadership that respects the law and respects homeowners. The story ended with shots of the new HOA board meeting, where Frank was discussing plans to use some of the reserve fund to improve the community playground and repair the clubhouse roof. The contrast with Patricia's reign was stark. Life in Sunset Hills improved dramatically after the new board took over. Fines dropped to a fraction of what they had been under Patricia. The few fines that were issued were for legitimate violations like truly abandoned vehicles or serious property neglect, and they were applied fairly and with proper notice. Greg became the vice president of the board and took charge of the community newsletter. His first edition included a summary of the revised guidelines, an explanation of the appeals process, and a reminder that the board worked for the homeowners, not the other way around. Mrs. Chen organized a community barbecue to celebrate the changes. Nearly everyone in Sunset Hills attended, and it was the first neighborhood event in years that felt genuinely friendly rather than mandatory. People were smiling, kids were playing, and there was a sense of relief that the culture of fear was over. I was flipping burgers on one of the community grills when Frank approached with a beer in hand. "Nathan, I wanted to thank you again," he said. "What you did took guts. A lot of people were unhappy with how things were run, but nobody wanted to be the first to challenge Patricia. You took that risk and you changed this community for the better." "I just wanted to get my propane delivered," I joked. Frank laughed. "Well, you did that and a whole lot more. You know, we are still finding problems in the old guidelines." Last week, we discovered a rule that would have prevented homeowners from installing solar panels without board approval. That is illegal under Arizona law. Patricia had no idea what she was doing, but she was so sure she was right that she never bothered to check. What happened to her, anyway? I have not seen her around. She moved, sold her house last month and left the state. I heard she moved to Florida. God help whatever HOA she ends up in. I could not help but feel a little satisfied at that. Patricia had tried to use the HOA as her personal kingdom, and when that kingdom fell, she had nothing left. The settlement money went to good use. I paid off my mortgage, which had been my plan anyway. I also donated $5,000 to a local organization that provided free legal assistance to homeowners in HOA disputes. Robert had told me that many people could not afford to fight back the way I had, and I wanted to help level the playing field. The fire marshal's office launched a broader initiative to review HOA rules across Arizona for conflicts with fire code and other safety regulations. Inspector Garrett became something of a minor celebrity in the HOA reform community, speaking at conferences and working with legislators to strengthen homeowner protections. A state representative named Maria Gonzalez introduced a bill inspired by my case. The proposed law would require all HOA boards to have their guidelines reviewed by a qualified attorney every 5 years to ensure compliance with state law. It would also establish stronger penalties for retaliatory enforcement and create a state-level appeals process for homeowners. The bill was still working its way through the legislature, but it had bipartisan support. I testified at a committee hearing about the bill, sharing my story and emphasizing the need for accountability in HOA governance. Several other homeowners testified as well, describing their own experiences with overzealous boards and illegal rules. The hearing made the local news, and public support for the bill was strong. My case also attracted attention from HOA reform advocates nationally. I was interviewed for an article in a national consumer protection magazine and invited to speak at a conference in Chicago about HOA accountability. It was surreal to think that a simple propane delivery had sparked such a wide-ranging conversation. But the most meaningful changes were right in my own community. Sunset Hills felt like a real neighborhood now. People talked to each other without fear of being reported to the HOA. Kids played in yards without worrying about stepping on grass that was the wrong height. Homeowners made reasonable improvements to their properties without filing 17 forms in triplicate. The new board operated with transparency. Meeting minutes were posted online within 24 hours. The budget was reviewed publicly every quarter. Proposed rule changes were circulated for comment before being voted on. It was how an HOA should work. About a year after the whole thing started, I was having dinner with Greg and his wife, Amanda, at their house. We were talking about how much had changed. "You know what is funny?" Amanda said. Patricia probably thought she was protecting property values by being so strict. But houses are selling for more now than they did under her watch. Turns out people actually want to live in a community where they are not constantly worried about being fined. "Who would have thought?" Greg said sarcastically. "Treating people with respect makes them happier. Revolutionary concept." My phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Jennifer Stone, the reporter who had covered my story. She was working on a follow-up piece about the impact of the case 1 year later and wanted to do another interview. "Speaking of which," I said, showing them the email, "looks like I am going to be on the news again." The follow-up story aired 3 weeks later. It covered all the changes in Sunset Hills, interviewed several homeowners about the improved community atmosphere, and highlighted the state legislation that was moving forward. The story also mentioned that similar cases had been filed in other Arizona communities, with homeowners using my case as precedent to challenge their own HOAs. Inspector Garrett appeared in the story again, explaining that his office had found fire code conflicts in over 40% of the HOA guidelines they reviewed across the state. "This is a widespread problem," he said. HOA boards often mean well, but they are not experts in fire safety or building codes. They create rules that sound reasonable but actually create hazards or prevent proper safety maintenance. We are working to fix that. The story ended with Jennifer standing in front of my house, with the propane tank visible in the background. 1 year ago, a simple propane delivery sparked a community uprising and launched a statewide review of HOA practices, she said. Today, homeowners across Arizona have stronger protections, and one community has learned that accountability matters. From Sunset Hills in Phoenix, this is Jennifer Stone. The state bill passed 6 months later with overwhelming support. Governor Kate Hobbs signed it in a public ceremony, and I was invited to attend. It was strange to stand in the state capitol and realize that my frustration over a propane delivery had contributed to actual legislative change. Homeowners have rights, and those rights must be protected, the governor said in her remarks. HOAs serve important functions in our communities, but they must operate within the law. This bill ensures they do, and it gives homeowners the tools to hold their boards accountable. Robert attended the ceremony with me. "You know," he said as we watched the signing, "I have been practicing HOA law for 15 years, and I have never seen a single case create this much impact. You should be proud." I was proud. Not just of the legislative changes or the settlement or even the improvements in Sunset Hills. I was proud that I had stood up for what was right, even when it would have been easier to just pay the fines and move on. Back in Sunset Hills, life continued peacefully. The new board served their terms and were re-elected without opposition. Frank proved to be an excellent president, and the community thrived under the new leadership. Property values did indeed rise, and the neighborhood gained a reputation as one of the better-managed HOA communities in Phoenix. I stayed in my house, continuing to receive propane deliveries without incident. Joe, the delivery driver, always waved and asked how things were going. "Man, I have delivered propane to 1,000 houses," he told me once, "and you are the only customer who ever ended up on the news because of it." The propane tank itself became something of a neighborhood landmark, a symbol of standing up to unreasonable authority. During the community barbecue the following summer, someone jokingly suggested putting a plaque on it. We did not do that, but I did get a custom cover for the tank that said, "This tank approved by the fire marshal." Years later, when I thought about the whole experience, what struck me most was how fragile our rights can be when we do not defend them. Patricia had been violating the law for years, and nobody had seriously challenged her until I did. How many homeowners had paid unjust fines? How many had avoided making necessary repairs or improvements because they feared HOA retaliation? The answer, I learned, was too many. But my case showed that one person fighting back could make a difference. It inspired others to stand up for their rights. It led to legal reforms that protected homeowners across the state. And it turned Sunset Hills from a community ruled by fear into a real neighborhood. All because I needed propane delivered to my house and refused to accept that wanting basic home services was somehow a violation. In the end, Patricia had been wrong about everything. Wrong about the law, wrong about her authority, and wrong about what makes a community strong. She had tried to rule through intimidation and found out that homeowners had rights she could not override. The fire marshal had sided with me because the law was on my side. The court had sided with me because Patricia's actions were indefensible. And the community had sided with me because they were tired of being bullied. The final irony was that Patricia's aggressive enforcement had nearly bankrupted the HOA through legal fees, while my lawsuit had brought in enough money to fully fund the community's reserves. The settlement I received came partially from the HOA's insurance, which meant that Patricia's actions had cost the insurance company dearly. I heard later that the insurance company had dropped coverage for several other HOAs because of the risk that their boards might abuse their authority the same way Patricia had. My propane tank still sits in my backyard, properly maintained and regularly filled. Every time I see it, I think about how something so mundane became the center of a legal battle that changed my community, and contributed to statewide reform. It reminds me that standing up for what is right matters, even when the fight is over something as simple as keeping your grill and generator fueled. Sunset Hills is a better place now. The HOA serves the homeowners instead of ruling over them. Rules are reasonable and legally sound. Enforcement is fair and consistent. And if someone needs propane delivered, they just call the company and schedule it, like it should be. Sometimes I see new residents moving into the neighborhood, and I wonder if they know the history. Do they realize that the reasonable HOA they are joining was born from a confrontation over a propane delivery? Probably not. But that is okay. The important thing is that the system works now, and it works because people demanded accountability. I still live in Sunset Hills, and I plan to stay. It is a good community with good neighbors and leadership that respects both the law and the people they serve. My propane tank is full, my generator is ready for monsoon season, and my grill is always available for neighborhood cookouts. And if Patricia ever sees this story from wherever she ended up in Florida, I hope she learned something from it. Power without accountability is tyranny, even in a suburban HOA. Rules without reason are oppression, even when they are written in a community guidelines document. And homeowners who know their rights are the ultimate check on boards that forget they are servants, not rulers. The propane tank in my backyard is more than just a container of fuel. It is a monument to standing up for what is right, a reminder that individual action can create systemic change, and proof that sometimes the most important battles are fought over the most ordinary things.